cool. Why don't we start with Judy then, and then we can go to Laura.
Great. So it's a pleasure to be with you all. I'm a poet, painter, and environmentalist, and an expert advisor for multicultural environmental participation. I'm probably best known as the honorary president of Black Environment Network. In the context of sustainability, I would like to home in on the key aspect of equality, diversity, and inclusion, which is access to full environmental participation by disadvantaged groups. Having worked for over 30 years in participation, I can collapse the whole process into two short phrases. We love what we enjoy, and we protect what we love. Set within the first phrase, we love what we enjoy, is the issue of contact and enjoyment to kick off the process of relating to nature. We need to notice that in some of the bleak places where our most disadvantaged groups live, there's often not a single shred of green. During lockdown, we saw people flocking into the green spaces that we have because nature offers solace. There's also research now demonstrating the link between mental and physical health and being in nature. The second phrase, we protect what we love, tells us that if we pay attention to access to nature where people live, work, and play, they're setting on a journey of relationship to nature that will result in unlocking a vast missing contribution to the care and protection of nature. We need the joy of more local green and more activities provided in these spaces, leading to a whole range of benefits, such as the fundamental impact of experiencing beauty, befriending, countering isolation and building community, stimulating creativity that enriches people's lives, or learning new knowledge and skills that can result in more job opportunities, especially as the government is working towards 2 million new green jobs for net zero. In these challenging times, we should accentuate the very positive role of engagement with nature to ameliorate the impact of multiple crises that are affecting all our lives, with attention to those that are most vulnerable through action for equality, diversity, and inclusion. I would like to point to three significant dimensions structurally to help with this. Firstly, representation. The principle is that those who are most affected should lead. They are living the experience and they should set the agenda. We must build the visibility of activists from multicultural and other disadvantaged groups to increase the prominence of their voices. Secondly, engagement. Engagement delivers benefits and facilitates contribution. Importantly, as people engage, they learn about the detail of sustainability and become more effective at voicing their needs and contributing. I often point out that people are not instantly consultable. Being proficiently consultable expresses a high level of awareness gained through engagement. Thirdly, provision. There are things that people can do for themselves and for sustainability, but there are other things that only specialist organizations or government can do. For example, insulating social housing. Here it is government that needs to act, benefiting nature by saving energy and keeping people warm. Black Environment Network asserted in 1987 that there is no such thing as a purely environmental initiative. A so-called purely environmental initiative is one that has neglected its social, cultural, and economic dimensions. If we recognize this in our work with sustainability, we will go a long way towards making equality, diversity, and inclusion a reality. It is a two-way street paradigm of people for nature and nature for people. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Judy. That's really great. And yeah, thank you so much. Laura, you said that you had a bit of a presentation. Are you okay to set all of that up?
Just a quick introduction to myself, following Judy's wonderful provocation. My name is Laura Denning. I'm an artist who uses sound, film, and social participation, and mostly my work explores themes with an environmental bias. But today I'm not talking about art. Today I'm talking about an issue that affects me personally. So I'm going from Judy's structural overview, which is absolutely necessary and vital, to a more personal take on around who is excluded. This is a short clip about an event that I went to recently, and I'll talk about it after this short clip. I attended that event, and I have to say that I'm quite critical of it. And so the second part of this provocation is that criticism, I guess. Can you see that? Brilliant. So I went to that event that the ITV did a little news item on, and whilst the news item was was great in that it allowed people to talk about grassroots initiatives and joining up the dots, I have to say that everybody present was either a landowner, a homeowner, or a business owner, and that the assembly was really a series of pitches offering commercial solutions and eco-chic startups, ways to make money from the climate crisis. Lifestyle change wasn't even mentioned. Art was provided as a sideshow. In fact, Letters to the Earth, which is something you've probably all heard of, was invited as, you were invited to write a letter to the Earth as part of a coffee break activity. And that was the artistic activity. There we go. This is the Facebook page of the organisers, Big Bree Net Zero. As you can see, they're very clear about who they include in their group. It's a platform for landowners, businesses, homeowners, and visitors. Visitors might otherwise be read as customers. People in rented accommodation working in sectors now labelled, thanks to the pandemic, euphemistically as key workers, otherwise people known as on minimum wages, weren't invited and weren't included. I'm aware that I'm running out of time, so I'm going to try and be quick. Second homers call themselves swallows. These are not the beautiful summer visitors that scoop and swerve through the sky, but the term they use to refer to themselves, a term that renders them harmless and welcome. However, in the local council where that assembly took place and where I live, the council has recently, September of last year, declared a housing crisis, and their reasons are a lack of rented accommodation which is available for longer than 6 months, an excessive rise in house prices due to second homeowners, the conversion of properties to Airbnbs, and people moving into the district since the pandemic. And therefore the council had no choice but to declare a housing crisis. For me, this is very strongly linked to fuel poverty, which is an indicator of poverty. And you can see at the bottom of the map an area in South Devon with a black border. That is South Hams District Council, where I live. Yes, it's predominantly rural, but rural doesn't necessarily always mean that you're on holiday. And I just want to share my personal experience, because I think that it probably mirrors many other people's experiences. So we're all aware that fuel and electricity prices are set to double in a couple of weeks. It is the daily standing charge that is doubling, so using less electricity won't reduce the impact of that rise. The autobiographical portrait I want to paint is about the fact that I live in a 1-bedroom cottage. The night storage heaters here are dated by the internet, because I checked, to 1985, and therefore are not as efficient as contemporary heating solutions. My landlord does not declare his rental incomes, he has many, and refuses to take a deposit, because to do so would be to enter into a legally binding agreement. And he will not allow me to claim what I know is available to me, which is free insulation and a grant towards new and efficient heating, because it would alert the authorities to his multiple properties. I guess that gives me some choices. I could report him, but then I'd get evicted. Or I could find better accommodation, but given that I live in a county with a declared housing crisis, that would seem unlikely. So I simply want to ask, as my provocation, have I made the links between housing, poverty, and sustainability clear? And who is excluded from making sustainable choices? Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's really interesting to think about those links. Thank you so much.
If you want, I can go next.
Yeah, go for it. Thanks.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Lyons. I am now 19 years old and I'm from the Cayman Islands. I am an environmental activist and advocate, and I've been in this field for about 2 years now, going on 3 this summer. So it's been a pretty short journey, but there's been so much that has happened. And once again, thank you for having me today. So today, obviously, we're all here to talk about how equality and sustainability are interlinked together. I feel like personally, a lot of the time when we think about equality, we always talk about race, we always talk about gender, we talk about economic classes. But as a youth leader of my community, something that we don't talk about is inequality towards people of different ages. So today what I'm gonna do in my provocation is talk a little bit about what my experience was, and hopefully it will resonate with some people. So first of all, like I said, I've started my journey just about 3 years ago, and I am from the Cayman Islands. In the Cayman Islands, it is a very much so you respect everyone, you respect your elders, you respect what they have to say, you're always looking to please them, you're trying not to necessarily go against their word, just because that's kind of how our culture is set up. We just always want to respect our elders. So moving on a little bit from that, I'm going to come back to that. Growing up, I was in the public school system, and there's nothing wrong with that, except that the same access to education that private school students would have was not provided to us, which left us without the same awareness and opportunities about sustainability in our environment. So I did end up transitioning to the public school system because I worked for a scholarship. This scholarship did not only make me realize the economic disparities in my community and how immense they were, but it also helped me to realize the systemic inequalities that people faced on my island. A lot of the time, people in these private school institutions were from people that were not of my island, yet they had better access to education, even though they were not from the Cayman Islands. Anyways, so it wasn't until I had the scholarship that I heard about sustainability, or even what it was. I didn't realize that water bottles could be made out of cardboard, or that it was important to refill your water bottles. I didn't realize the detriment that plastic had on our environment. I didn't realize how important it was for our mangroves to be there and not for them to just be deforested for the sake of development, you know? And these are all things that I did not realize or have access to. So when I finally started learning about the environment, this is something that I became passionate about. And my mentor, Mr. Bill, got me involved. We went to Vancouver, Canada, got involved into a boot camp called Ocean Heroes. And from there, I came home and I was the vice president of a youth-led organization called Protect Our Future. We ran off running with so many different projects and campaigns, and everything was amazing until the government proposed to have a cruise birthing facility on our island. Now, this was going to damage hundreds and thousands of coral reefs that were vital to our ecosystem on our island. So when this happened, the government was going to make a referendum where people were going to be able to vote whether or not this is something they want, since it was an upset in our community. However, with this voting process, people that were my age at the time, because I was 16, would not have been able to vote on something that was going to affect our future. So in order for our voices to be heard, we created banner campaigns and we protested almost every other week just so that our voices could be heard. During this time, my mom and my grandmother were constantly getting calls from people my age, younger, older. Some of them were supportive, others were not. We had personal family members tell me that I did not know what I was talking about and I needed to go back home and read a book and focus on my school because I had no idea what I was talking about. So during this process, there was many people who were trying to silence my voice because I was younger. Once again, I'm coming back to the elders thing now. Of course, you want to respect everything that everyone is saying, and especially from your elders. However, the fact that the elders also were agreeing with us young kids made us realize that what we were saying was not only right, but it was valid, not only from a younger demographic, but from an older demographic as well. So when we finally started getting through to the government, they decided that they were going to cancel the cruise port referendum. And in the end, we ended up saving our island millions of dollars that would have been put into our economy that would have not made sense as of right after this happened, COVID took place, and the tourism economy has flopped, has not gone back to the way it was. And obviously we're all getting back to the real world now and hoping to get back on top of things. But we did end up saving the government millions of dollars that would have went into the economy that would not have been used. So in my opinion, it's sustainability and equality issue. So in short, if my experiences, yes, it is. It was not until I had proper access to education and resources that I even realized what sustainability was and how vital our environment around us was. Furthermore, many people tried to silence my voice because of my involvement in the environment. My age should not be the definition or be defining of what I can and cannot say. One thing that my organization definitely did drill into everyone's heads while we were doing our campaigning and protesting is the fact that even though the youth of today is only a fraction of the world's population, we are 100% of the future. And it is very important for our voices to be heard. It is important for us to be given opportunities and to take up space and have seats at tables such as these, to have conversations and share experiences and our ideas about issues that affect our society today and tomorrow. Furthermore, not only should our governments, but us as people, we need to fight to make sure things such as these, where opportunities to education and to diminish economic disparities and have more awareness to issues such as sustainability, are accessible to all. That's it. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope we enjoy the rest of this forum.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's really great to hear your experience. So Sarah.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah PandenJones and I teach in the School of Film, Art and Media. So the main module that I teach is called Your World, Your Media, and it's very much about trying to get so first year students to think a bit more socially and a bit more politically. So it's media production, but also engaging with climate change and Black Lives Matter and the implications of those concepts. So in terms of, is sustainability an equality issue? Well, yes, definitely. Much of my own research is concerned with the environmental impacts on communities, and we know that climate change exacerbates existing inequalities. So in terms of the communities who are suffering the impacts of climate change, I'm really interested in facilitating their own voices and perspectives as much as I can. So people talk about parachute journalism, where journalists kind of parachute into a country, they kind of take what they need in quite an extractionist way, and then they just leave and that's it. So I've tried to avoid that, what I would say is maybe a parachute researcher approach. So for example, some of my research has been in Kiribati, which is a low-lying island nation in the Pacific Ocean. And it's very vulnerable to climate change. So for example, as sea levels rise, you could get 110,000 people displaced because of climate change. So this place is often depicted as a sinking nation, drowning paradise, a canary in the coal mine, almost as if the most significant thing about it is that it's a warning for other more kind of important places. It's a visualization of the future which faces all of us if we don't respond to climate change. So on the one hand, I'd say that I myself responded to this place as a kind of powerful metaphor for the climate change story. But it's really interesting to go beyond that as well, because even though it is a compelling story, it's also quite reductive to represent Kiribati in this one kind of dimensional way. So I also think you need to think about how this narrative is quite disempowering for the people who live there. The story of Kiribati is also a story of incredible survival, Indigenous knowledge, and complex cultural heritages in the plural. And we know that whereas Indigenous knowledge is threatened by climate change, it's also essential to our responses to it. So, for example, when I went to Kiribati, I interviewed my contact there, Claire Antarea, who's a climate activist, and she works for a grassroots environmental organisation there. And I was saying to her, how do you feel about the kinds of representations which exist of climate change in Kiribati at the moment? And what she said was, you can't just go by what you see, you have to talk to people. And she really resented this idea of journalists coming to Kiribati, maybe for a couple of evenings, staying in the main capital island, like Tarawa, and then putting out their representations out to the world and having so much power and such like amplified voice compared to the actual people who live there and who experience Kiribati over time. And she was, very upset talking about this. And then she particularly felt very sensitive about people's interpretation of poverty, thinking that, Kiribati is always depicted as a very poor place. And actually, she was right. When you truly spent time there and talked to people, you noticed that, there was no homelessness. Everybody was cared for in this kind of community living that you have there. And she was saying, this is subsistence lifestyles. We don't have a fridge, so we don't store food, but the ocean is full of fish and no one is starving. And she said that, she'd visited places like Australia and couldn't believe the poverty that Aboriginal communities experience there. So she was saying, that's poverty, alcoholism, homelessness, loneliness. And then you look at us, we take care of each other. And it was so interesting to hear her perspective. And so for my journey for kind of communicating the environmental impacts in Kiribati, I sort of moved from this idea of I'm going to go there and tell the story of what's going on there and the threat to the people and the culture. So actually standing back and thinking, actually, I should really just listen a bit better to the local perspectives. And as I did that, I realized that, there are other environmental stories that matter to the people there, which don't really make the kind of mainstream news outside Kiribati. But that would be, for example, the far less kind of sexy subject, but plastic waste, which is almost inevitable on an island. Where do you put all the rubbish? There's urbanization, globalization, more Western goods, and, there's no real system for dealing with that waste. And that has a huge impact on the health of the water there. And also, we tend to say, Kiribati, they're threatened by the ocean. So the ocean itself is just this negative thing. Whereas if you actually really engage with the more Indigenous perspectives, you understand that the ocean, of course, is like the resource, the main resource, which provides, most of the food, for example, fish, huge part of, oral stories and the culture and people's everyday living. So you need to, if you want to create a film about Kiribati, you need to acknowledge the positive sides of the ocean as well. And so with, working with other researchers and academics as well, and the local grassroots organisation, we sort of changed our approach. And for, an ensuing research project, then we decided that we would allocate funds to the local environmental organisation and ask them to research what the community needed themselves. And they said, we really need to work on a way of like disposing plastic. So they used money that from my project, which was funded by the AHRC, to buy rubbish trucks and train volunteers to collect rubbish. And then at one point they sent me pictures of this area that was once covered in plastic and was now turned into a children's play park for that community. And I thought, that's fantastic. I feel so much prouder of that than, anything that I've ever produced as an academic article, even films that I've made. That's real tangible community level benefit. So I feel really good about that element of the work in Kiribati. So I've learned, that I need to be humble myself, learn from others. You have to really work hard to avoid kind of white savior narratives or mentality in, doing that kind of research. And similarly, I've worked on an open university project in India where we filmed women who work they're farmers and they're lower caste women as well. And I found that film was an incredible tool for accessing, disseminating, and just fundamentally valuing their knowledge. And so these films have been shown by the local partners there, this organisation called Green Foundation. They've used it for community outreach and education. It's been shown in the House of Commons in an event exploring global perspectives. And I thought, well, this is really amazing. If you actually I mean, it's very easy within universities to think that all knowledge, like all validated knowledge, exists in academic papers. But if you travel somewhere like Kiribati, I literally didn't see a single book in the kind of maybe 5 weeks that I spent there. That's not really their knowledge system. And the same with the women farmers of India, you know, who listens to them and their kind of oral histories? You know, there's a lot of knowledge there that, you know, others should really be paying attention to. And I do think that film can really work to democratize knowledge production and equalize it as well. So in terms of my own provocation, I've used the phrase give voice myself, but it is actually problematic. You know, who are we to give voice and who exactly needs to listen in order for another person to have a voice? So that's my thought for the day.
Thank you so much. And yeah, you've all kind of come from such kind of different personal and professional backgrounds and perspectives on the subject. It's really amazing. Does anyone have any kind of initial thoughts or questions, either to present or to ask any of the panelists based on what they've said? That can include from the panel members yourselves, or speakers yourselves, if you have any thoughts based on what anyone else has said.
I have a question for Dejia. Well, it's more, I don't know if it's a question, but I was really motivated by what you said. I absolutely feel very strongly that young people need to have the right to vote at an earlier age than 18. And I wonder if you know anywhere in the world where young people are given more of a platform than, so, the Cayman Islands or the UK?
I'm actually not sure about that because, like I said, I'm involved in a lot of different organizations that are very youth-based, and a lot of them are very international, where we'll have people on this side of the world, on my side of the world, like where I'm from, south, west, north, east, you name it, and we have everyone. But I think everyone is kind of facing the same issue in terms of like feeling like you are either going to be limited to what you can or cannot say, or it's like you have to wait until you get to a certain age. And I do agree with you. I think voting at 18 is not ideal because even just as a high school student, you enter high school at what, 14, 15 years old. At that point, you're starting to be educated on world issues and having a better understanding of what your personal views are. And obviously, all of us come from different backgrounds and ethnicities and cultures and whatnot. But I feel like everyone still has a right to voice their opinion, especially at that age. I was 16. I knew what was going on. I knew what was right from wrong. So having my voice being stifled through a referendum that I couldn't vote in, it was so frustrating. But at the same time, sometimes I think that's necessary, that frustration, because without that frustration, we wouldn't have made all those campaigns and had all those protests and actually made people more aware of what was going on and the truth, because the government was putting out so much propaganda and they wanted us to be on their side and they wanted us to, you know, just coincide with what they wanted, even though it wasn't right. And we all knew, the people from my organization, we knew it wasn't right. So being able to do that for people and provide that for people, if that meant that I couldn't vote and at the end of the day it was something that motivated us, I'm okay with it. But I do agree, globally, we do need to do better with hearing young voices, but not only young voices, but older voices too. I feel like after a certain point, when people reach a certain age, people who are older, their voices start to become silenced as well, because people think, oh, you're old now, you don't know what's going on, when that's not true. People have seen societies and cultures and backgrounds manifest into what they are today. And I think it's important to also hear those voices. So for us, when we got to go to like the older people's homes and kind of speak to them and talk to them about what they thought, it was so interesting to hear and hear their provocations on what they thought, you know, was necessary, because this specific spot that we were saving, it was not only important to the environment, but it was important to our culture and our heritage as well. And that was something that we could not supply, but they could as our elders too, and they could voice that that experience. So like I said, I think equality amongst ages is something that we definitely don't speak about enough. And I hope this conversation for people will allow you guys to go home and, you know, talk to your moms and dads and children or cousins or whatever, and kind of hear more things about what they have to say in the household as well.
Thank you.
I really, really echo what you're saying, Dijia, because the other thing I think about youth voices is that there's a whole wave of youth voices rising, and I think it is so wonderful to see your freshness and everything. I think one of the most important things about young people is that they get at the essence of the thing. You know, a lot of specialists and so on are so mired in all the details that they're constantly doing nothing because they're constantly looking at so many details without homing in on the main essential thing of being able to take action. And I think keeping that thing of the essence of the big themes that we need to address by young people is so important because of that. The other thing is that my goodness, we are the generations who have ruined the world for you. If you don't have a voice, you have a more legitimate voice than anybody else. This is what you are landed with, to live with after we are all gone. So I think the power of youth voice, the clarity of youth voice must be recognized and listened to, and people must act on it. We're in such a hurry now, you know, we have no time. So to have that clarity and really doing things anchored in that clarity coming from young people is just something we really need.
Thank you, Judy. That's so interesting. If I could just, I think the conversation in the chat box is so interesting. So I was asking whether people had ideas for how to kind of integrate these ideas in either teaching or research. So it might be difficult to summarize all of it, but I mean, this is great. So Penny is suggesting that we could integrate live projects on these themes. Eva's saying we could promote internship and summer school placements, and that first-hand experience is so important. Penny's drawing our attention to the links with Our Shared World, which Jenny and Penny are involved in. And there's a link there as well that we could join. And Matilda is also critiquing, you know, the lack of coverage of these kind of issues at school, which, you know, issues like equality and sustainability, which I completely agree. So thanks very much for sharing your ideas. I think this is really interesting. I also agree with the need to respond to youth perspectives on, for example, the climate crisis. Completely agree with everything Evan said on that topic. In terms of integrating that on my module at BASPA, one of the themes I ask media production students to respond to when they create films is the climate crisis and/or Black Lives Matter. And what's been absolutely amazing is how many have responded to the climate change theme this year, particularly because of the COP in Glasgow. And many of my students, because of this brief, then went out and talked to members of Youth Climate Swarm. And they went to meetings, they talked to Extinction Rebellion, they contacted parents or friends and all that. And many then wrote very movingly about how this actually really raised their awareness, which they hadn't really been taught about much in school. And so I think that we can design our teaching in university to, in a way, promote peer-to-peer learning. And some of the videos that some young students made on climate change, where previously they had not been interested, made me cry when I watched it. It was so moving, and talking about the mental health impacts of, you know, eco-anxiety and so on. And I thought it's so much better that, as others have said in the chat box, rather than me preaching to them about climate change, they went and found out about it themselves by interviewing other young people. And I thought there's a really kind of like powerful kind of learning environment in terms of raising awareness and also feeling that, you know, we have a stake in these issues. It's not about other people telling us what to think, but we can go and investigate for ourselves. So I was really happy with the outcome of that particular learning exercise. The films available for public to watch. The student films are not available for the public to watch, but I have thought about maybe editing short extract of their films with their permission and sharing it with colleagues, just so that you can see just how fantastic the student work can be when they really engage with social issues. So it's not just about the social issues, it's actually about, you make better films if you really engage with these kind of issues, because it's very powerful, they're powerful stories. I'll stop talking now, let someone else talk.
I think what Dijia said about, you know, education and information and not being taught enough and so on. I think that one of the powerful things that young people are so good at, that people of my generation are no good at it at all, is social media. So in a way, young people the ones who have found out something and feel that this is what we really need to know, the sharing and mutual education on social media, I think is really important.
That share button has become something that has made people a lot more aware of what is going on. Like, it is insane how much information you can just get by just one click of a button. Like, I'm happy to be a part of this generation just for that, you know. But it's interesting in one sense, because it does make you more aware. But there are cases, like I said, the government was spreading propaganda and people were spreading that as well, and that was misinformation. So on one side you can get it in a really good perspective, and on the other side it could be actually kind of detrimental to the things that people are learning, because there's some things that just aren't true, and that's one toxic trait of social media. You have to really be able to filter through, you know, what is right or what is wrong, or kind of manifest what your opinion is based on the information that you're being provided. Even on social media platforms such as TikTok, we were speaking about this in my flat the other night. You get fed so many things on a daily basis that you have to sit down and consider, like, what do I believe? What do I not believe? But at the same time, it's like, when is it too much and when is it just enough? So that's one thing I find that my generation is battling with now, even on the environmental front and equality front, because there's so many things that we have coming at us at one time. What do we prioritize first? What do we leave until the end? Like, what's more important? You know, so it's something that we kind of struggle with as well. I know there's a couple of my classmates on here and my best friend, so I don't know if you guys want to share your thoughts on that either in the chat box, but I think it's really interesting for us to talk about that as well.
Another tool we have, of course, is a developing Zoom culture. You know, today, like everyone else, we record the session so that it can be shared further than just this event. Once upon a time, before all these Zoom and free events and so on, many people who, like Laura was pointing out, you have to pay to go to a conference, you have to be invited to be going to a conference, and so we now have a much greater arena, Laura, don't we, to do our own thing. If they won't do it for us, we'll do it ourselves with very little or no money, because Zoom is available and recordings are available to bring people in as well, and being able to link to people from much greater distances and share with each other and find ourselves, you know, sharing and strengthening each other.
I think this is a really important point. I'm a co-director of an organisation called Cine Sisters Southwest, which aims to promote grassroots filmmaking activity by people who identify as female within the region. And one of our part of our program is a monthly online talk by an international artist. So we've had artists from South Korea, from Canada and other places presenting to audiences that have come to our little regional organisation, but from around the world. And I also I attend a lot of Zoom events because I can, and it's made the world a much bigger and complicated and interesting place, because all I have to do is log in. And I think that Sarah talked earlier about democratizing knowledge production through film, and I think perhaps also platforms like Zoom allow for that to take place too, precisely because we can have these conversations. Really powerful stuff.
Yes, I think that also sharing what we find, you know, for example, I'm very keen about a project called Climate Story Lab. It is done by Doc Society, who's a documentary filmmaking society, and they have done this project to enable short films to be made by climate by people from all over the world, especially younger filmmakers who are starting. And the other angle they've taken is that we know a lot of things are really, really negative and devastating, but they want most of the films to have a positive angle and solutions and example to really give this counterbalance, so that there's something positive alongside all the negative to carry us. Because, so many of us are really beaten down by too much bad information and bad news. So we need to be also buoyed up by what is positive and what people can do by example. So Climate Story Lab is a really wonderful thing to link into.
I think Alexandra has a question.
Maybe not a question, but a contribution, and thanks for the panel and everyone for wonderful sharing. Those are really inspiring thoughts, and I'm looking forward to actually exploring more after this session, seeing and watching the films and all the creative means. I just wanted to contribute with a small reflection. I'm a lecturer in the business school, and as I say that, I already have shivers on my back because I feel incredible responsibility, especially for all the badness that is happening around the world. So I think that I'm coming from that perspective that, what we teach and kind of the idea of implementing and embedding sustainability and equality issues and social innovation agenda across the programs that are definitely the business and management oriented, because this is where I see a contribution for shaping the future leadership. And I think that is incredibly important. And I think that I am really excited, but perhaps using more creative means, and what Sarah was saying about the films and so on. I think that's a wonderful way of actually shaping minds and imagination of young people and people across different pathways. I do have students, also mature students, but they are on that trajectory of becoming future leaders or working in the management, the decision-making position. And I think that is a great opportunity to really tap. So I'm really looking forward to, I've just inherited a module on strategic management, and this is yet another great opportunity to actually open up discussion, embedding ethical issues and democratizing that education. So we actually help, I think, and empower students, learners to actually go and find different ways of engagement. So one way is that very much activism on the ground and grassroots as well. But I think also helping people find voices of how they can be activists with that smaller a, so they are activists in their daily practices, so they become champions in their workplaces. Great if they can champion a positive change right at the top, that can filter down and key decision makers. But even if it's a small change to start with in their workplace, in their profession, that would be great as well. So thank you very much again, and yes, thank you for all the inspiration.
I guess on that, I do have a question about people's kind of feelings or thoughts around what, like, personal or personal responsibilities that we can take versus, I guess, the kind of larger scale things that are obviously up to those that are in positions of power. Like, what do you feel are actually kind of meaningful things that we can do in our day-to-day lives around climate change and sustainability?
I think that is so important because, as you know, lots of things are dominated by the middle class view of participation. For example, the Grantham Institute came to me and asked me what I thought of their latest version of 9 things to do about the climate. They always do this, and they do it beautifully, they research it, blah, 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 all those things and so on. And I looked at it, I wrote back and said, it's just great if you're aiming at the middle classes. All the things like turn off the lights, so poor people need their lights on. They don't have umpteen rooms of all the lights blazing. They turn down the heating. Well, they're cold, they can't turn down the heating. Use public transport. Well, they never could afford a car anyway. So I said that actually, besides the 9 things that are so middle class orientated and typical that people keep naming over and over again, what about 9 things for the very poor? And what people need to do for them that they cannot possibly do themselves. And of course, one of the biggest thing for poorer people is that there's a lot of energy to be unlocked because they can't do things directly. They need to campaign for change so they can become great campaigners because of their situations. So one of the 9 things is campaign about what you need. And then, of course, the other thing that we all shy away from, what are the 9 things for the very rich? You know, we never talk about them. They have such power. They're doing such damage to the world and so on. And when I actually talked about, you know, the rich and how for some of the solutions we need with money and so on, that government is always afraid to tax the very rich. Lo and behold, a week later, an article appeared in the Independent by 102 millionaires, and the title of the article was, "Please Tax Us Now." So they're not all bad. Some of them really want to do things, but there's a big difference between leaving it to philanthropy and doing it at government level, because when government gets the money through taxes, it's structural, and what they do is infrastructural, as opposed to pockets given money by philanthropy. That is very, very important to actually notice. So I think we should really work much harder at what different sections of society need to do, both personally, publicly, and in campaigning.
I obviously completely second that. And I would also add that I think dismantling what we understand leadership to be and who sits in those positions of leadership is absolutely crucial. Being rich is perceived to be a position of leadership, but is it? Are they, as Judy said, are they leading on anything other than more accumulation of personal wealth? It would seem not from the outside. So I mean, I think it's great that we do need a joined up approach where everybody from all sectors of societies, in the plural, is heard, is given a platform. It is how it's done, and perhaps more books aimed at the middle class is not the way forward.
I think the image of leadership, like you say, Laura, you're so astute in what you've just said. The image of leadership is always those who are already in power in some way, whether they have a lot of money, whether they're in politics or whatever it is. But actually, leadership, like I said in my provocation, needs to actually come from lived experience. The affected communities should lead on what happens to them, because they know exactly what needs to be done. And Sarah pointed this out. Go to the affected communities. You will have very clear, detailed, not generalized things about what people do, but details about what that group of people needs now in that locality. Because I think implementation and policy are miles apart. You can have generalized policy points, but when it comes to implementation, it's the local people who can tell you exactly what you need to do. I think Sarah's examples were so powerful about that.
Oh, thank you, Judith, and thanks everyone. I'm really enjoying everyone's contribution so much. I was just thinking in terms of for those of us who are operating, you know, within the academy and we're producing research, there has been a huge change, obviously, in the way that people do research. It's not so much that you do research on a community and then you try and think, oh, how can we now achieve social impact? You kind of design research through dialogue with the community that you're interested in, and you try and align it to what's important to that community and what would benefit that community. And that isn't just about ideas, that's also about resources. So I think anyone who designs research projects should always think about, you know, people's knowledge and time is worth a lot of money, their existing knowledge, and that you should reward them financially and give people a stake in what you're doing by thinking about how does responsibility work. Why not, for example, like one project that was run through Bath University called Hydro Citizenship, rather than go to community and just like look at their relationship with water, think, well, who's already doing this work, give them the money and let them lead the process as to how you're going to implement your research and engagement in that particular community. So I think it kind of calls for like quite a radical way of rethinking these things. And one thing I feel really strongly about is, I don't know, I think sometimes within the academy, there's so much kind of gatekeeping of privilege, you know, only we speak this exclusive language and other people don't understand it and only some people can join this exclusive club. How do we open it up so that everyone kind of participates and benefits from the research that we do? Sometimes I'm really uncomfortable with how I think academia can be so precious sometimes. And, you know, a lot of people actually, it's in their interest to kind of hold on to this exclusive knowledge, but how does that benefit society as a whole?
Yeah, I think one thing everyone's kind of saying that I'm going to say in a different way, but I think it will resonate with a lot of people, is you cannot unsee what you've already seen. It's impossible to unsee what you've already seen. and going out into the field and doing all of this work that we're speaking about, once you see it, you can't stop. And I think that's where all of our passions come from, because we've had firsthand tangible experiences with these things that we're so passionate about now. Like when I had to go to my sister islands and see, like, we picked up tons and tons of litter all in one weekend, only 25 people, a whole ton over 2 days. Like that should not happen. That shouldn't be possible. But when you do see it, then that's when you want to start getting into more leadership positions. But at the same time, like Blaze was saying, like, how do you not feel guilty or helpless? Like, what do we do to move forward? And I think at this point, I think what everyone is saying is create awareness. Create awareness for people around you, your neighbors, your family, your friends. Like, in order for all of us to be on the same page, we have to actually know about it and see it and touch it and feel it. So in order for us to do that, we have to speak to each other, have conversations like these ones, share your experiences, share your ideas, share your thoughts, and then more campaigns and more people will get involved and passionate, and it will be a chain reaction and a butterfly effect to what can happen and the impact that it can have on our communities and our societies. So I think it's just really important is, if I'm not going to feel guilty and I know that I'm going to make a change, keep doing what I'm doing and create awareness and talk to people. And hopefully these conversations can start to change the paradigm of people's mentalities towards sustainability and equality.
Thank you.
I think we need to really work harder at using the mechanisms that are in place and creating even more mechanisms. For example, a parliamentary debate on an issue happens when you actually put forward a petition. Anybody can write a petition for what you want to be debated. If it hits 100,000 signatures, they will debate it in Parliament. And we are so good at social media nowadays to add your signature, it's just pushing a button. So when many people do that and actually voice the issues and so on, we can push the items up the agenda. And then there are all sorts of other organizations helping us that are, again, very easy to access. Anybody can put up a campaign on change.org, for example. So we must use all these mechanisms and create even more and bring people to be aware of this and get better at this, how we actually articulate the issues.
Just because it is, I just wanted to acknowledge that it is now 1, so technically the end of the event. I'm going to stop recording now.